But hi, everyone. This is Craig Zauser back with the next episode of the PCDN Social Change Career podcast live stream. Delighted to have everyone here. This is episode 7, season 13. So super congrats. And today we're going to be talking about finding your path to purpose with Sowmya Ayyar. For people who have not joined the live stream before, we generally goes about 1 hour, and this is recorded and streamed on YouTube and LinkedIn. We really enjoy hearing from people watching on LinkedIn, particularly, but on YouTube as well. So anytime during the stream, please feel free to add a couple of words where you're watching from, a little bit about your background or organizations or what you're studying, and particularly questions or comments you have. We'll try to weave them throughout the conversation. This is one of over, I think we're up to about 165 episodes with brilliant innovators from all over the world, from impact investors, reducing gender-based violence, human rights activists, heads of INGOs, foundations, doing honest career conversations about how to advance a career of impact, the good, the bad, and the unknown. So there are 3 quick requests before we jump in. Please follow Sowmya on LinkedIn and check out her work. If you like the podcast, or even if you don't like it, please consider rating and sharing it. That's the number one thing you can do for any podcaster in the world. Just take 10 seconds on whatever channel you listen on and rate it. And then 3, check out PCDN. So Sowmya is a senior research scholar at the Malaviya Center for Peace Research at Banaras Hindu University in India, where she explores the role of yogini sanghas in diplomacy and peace building. Got to say that is one of the coolest dissertation topics I've ever heard of. She is also the founder of Prafull Oorja Charitable Foundation, which trains yoga therapists to assist vulnerable communities across India. Through her art, poetry, and music, Sowmya celebrates the rich cultural narrative surrounding women's contributions across time. She's going to be launching a podcast soon, so she'll share that with us, called The World of Women, focusing on global women's thought leadership. We met, I don't even know how many years ago, but I mean, we're getting older, but we're still young. At a course I was teaching at University for Peace in Costa Rica when she was also studying in Austria. And she has been working at the intersection of well-being, social change, social impact for quite a long time, and has tremendous wisdom. I'm based in Medellin, Colombia, and Sowmya is currently in California, but often based in India. And so thank you so much for taking time to share your wisdom and the background you have. And so first of all, to start off with, I often ask this kind of question. When you think back to your younger years, did you, and all the research shows now, it's better not to ask people what they want to be, because human being is most important, but maybe like some challenges they want to work on or areas they're passionate about. But, you know, I think for my generation, it's more like, what did you aspire to work in? So if you think back to your teenage years, did you always have this interest in well-being and social change? And how did that lead to your path?
Thank you, Craig. First of all, thank you for having me on this. And I'm so happy to reconnect with you on this. And yes, it's been several years. I think I was at UPeace in 2010 and 11, so somewhere around there, 9, 10, 11 or something. Well, I did not have an idea when I was growing up in California. I come from a typical ethnically Indian family that, you know, where everybody is really gearing towards becoming an engineer or a doctor, maybe a lawyer. And that was kind of what I intended to do as well when I entered university. And when I was in my second year, my sophomore year at Santa Clara University, I met somebody who has become a very close friend and mentor, Dr. Marilyn Fernandez, and she was my professor of sociology. And it turns out, yes, her name sounds, Marilyn Fernandez sounds very Latin American. She is ethnically Indian. So I was just very surprised, and I thought to myself, oh, Indians can do things that are not doctor, lawyer, engineer. And I loved the class. It was just an introduction to sociology. I loved the way she taught and the way she interacted and mentored people. And I said, I think I'd like to learn more about how my life can be of service to others. And I also went to a Jesuit university where service was of utmost importance. So, in fact, every class that we took, we had to do, I think if we took 4 or 5 or 3 or 5 session courses every term, we probably at least 1 to 2 of them would require us to do a service project. So we were always involved in service. So the path of sociology really got me into this idea that what can service be. And while I was there, I also developed a very strong interest in women and ended up doing my bachelor's thesis on elderly Indian women and migration issues. I think that's how I got started. Is that if I don't answer the question, please re-ask something.
100% okay. And when you think back to, I mean, I taught at a Jesuit university for many years, Georgetown, still teach a little bit. But you think back to pre-university. So when you thought about something you might do professionally, was it, something that might have been expected, lawyer, doctor, teacher, business person, or you've always had this idea? Okay.
Very much so. There were 2 things. One is if somebody asked me, I always wanted to be my grandfather or my grandmother. I thought they had the coolest lives ever. I still think that they had amazing lives. But and just actually the way that my grandmother, when I was doing the research about my grandmother, and about elderly Indian women, that phrase that I'm content, I'm happy, and that's all. No matter what, I'm always happy. That kept resonating in my mind. Other than that, and of course, yeah, going into college, before college, I thought, okay, yeah, I'll be a doctor because that's what I'm going to go be pre-med because that's what, was expected in the Indian community. Um, yeah, and those were really the things that I was envisioning.
Okay. And I think I knew I didn't want to have a traditional career. Even in high school, I did some activism. I don't want to glorify it, but I wound up choosing a radical hippie major, went to UMass Amherst, kind of the Berkeley of the East Coast. And, the major was interdisciplinary. So we looked at structural inequality and culture and anthropology, economics, but also we spent a lot of time protesting. I won't talk about all the issues taking over buildings and stuff like that. But how did you go from studying sociology to then finding paid or volunteer fellowship employment? So once you developed a set of skills and kind of saw this ability, but service is really important both for society and can lead to a lot of individual and community fulfillment. How did you start navigating that to what does that mean in terms of next steps post university?
Yeah, so while I was in the university, I was volunteering at at a hospital and doing health education work, and just in the health education department, just helping develop some of the materials and setting them and whenever patients would come in to be able to provide them the right resources, tell them this is if this is your condition, here's some resources for you, and just being able to give them the right information. So I think that started me on the path to service, in addition to the many other opportunities that Santa Clara University provided. And I and then through that, I actually, my very first job out of university was for a large multinational corporation doing web development. So because I graduated in during the dot-com boom in 2000, that's what was available, and that was what was easily available. um, and after that, I kind of took a step back and I said, well, this is not really what I want to do. And I'm not sure I even want to be involved in this internet world, at least not at the level that, I'm creating it, um, or I'm, developing it for multinational corporations or for other groups. to be a user and a supporter and create my own website, that's a different system. So I think uh, through that, I took a step back and I spent some time in India, and I realized, you know what, I think I'd like to go back to school, understand more. I'd like to teach. And these were things that came naturally to me, teaching, mentoring. So I started along this path. Um, yeah, and their Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship is very impactful, amazing group out of Santa Clara University.
Yeah, and for people who don't know Santa Clara, again, it's a great place. And the Miller Center has all sorts of programs, both for students and faculty, but also for social enterprises around the world. This is not a paid sponsorship, but if you are doing something
Yeah.
innovative, make sure to check out their resources and see if what you're doing might fit, or you can just learn in general. So a couple
In a
of
couple of
questions.
hours, they're actually awarding the Opus Awards in about 3 or 4 hours, I think.
Okay.
Very interesting
So a
program.
couple. So this is like a general question, both for when you were working for a web design company and just throughout your career. So one of the things, and I've had this many times, is how do you know the path you're on? Because we all need to make money and pay the bills, unless we have rich relatives or some other forms of support. So how have you found it, the path to kind of realize what you were doing or expected to do may not be the right path? And for people who are, whether it's web design or PR and communications or finance or whatever it is, it could be international development. How have you known over the course of your career that it's time to explore something different or to go through that challenge? And then what are your thoughts for people who are at the crossroads, whether they're, mid, junior, or later in career? Like,
Yeah.
what has helped you navigate that? Because it's often people might know like what they're doing may not be the right thing for them at that point in time, but then it's often really hard to know like how to go to the next step.
Yes, it is very hard. I think I want to say that in the last after I met you at UPeace, and then I ended up shifting to India, um, which is mostly and you've used this word serendipitous with me before. So yes, it was very serendipitous, because most people who have grown up in California, especially in a place like Cupertino, which is the head of the Silicon Valley, or the center of Silicon Valley, you could say, would not say, oh, you know what, let me go off to a developing nation and become a yoga teacher for special needs. I have let life flow. I've been very fortunate that I've had a lot of financial support, especially in the last 5 to 8 years, from family, but I've also taken that as a responsible position. I've taken this as my karma, that while I may be getting from somewhere, I have to use that wisely and support the world. Um, at this junction, I'm also saying, okay, I need to find myself a a job that does provide not just for the short term but long term, because right now until now I've thought, okay, well, short term I can manage, and you know for bigger for the longer term I do need to have a plan. But that being said, I am looking I've always taken up roles that were offered to me, not necessarily as here's a paying job and a salary, but here is something that you can do that can truly serve. And the opportunity, for example, when I moved to India, a little boy literally ran into me, and then it turns out his parents were looking for a yoga teacher for his special need. He's diagnosed with uh, attention deficit hyperactivity, not necessarily a disorder, just a condition. And I took that role on, and I said, yes, if this is what you want me to do, if this is what the universe conspires for me to do, I'll do this. And that grew. It actually exploded very quickly. And that's what built me on my path to founding my NGO, and then and yeah, and it's been a
Thank,
wonderful journey with my NGO. Again, I don't know if
thank
I
you.
answered the question.
Yes, you did. And welcome, Christoph from the DRC. And please let us know others where you're watching from, your questions. So, in terms of you got to India and, kind of the family showed up with a son who kind of you were in the right place at the right time for the right need. And how in the world then did other people start spreading the word? Hey, there's this really interesting person who knows a lot about well-being and yoga and can like did you just start doing it and people showed up? You did marketing, friends boost, like how did you, and then how
Yeah.
did that lead to actually starting an organization, and what did it mean? Because I've
Now,
started NGOs, like what did it actually mean to start an NGO, both bureaucratic wise and in India, and then what is like a little bit how it got from kind of experimentation to deciding that this could be and should be an organization.
so there was one person, and then it kind of spread by word of mouth. Another kid in the neighborhood found out and started coming to classes, and then somebody else said, "Hey, can you maybe talk to a group of parents for me?" Okay, and that spiraled into a school asking me to teach. And I was a little bit hesitant even then, because I was thinking, until now, I've largely, well, maybe not completely, but a lot of times in my life, I've had this salary. So I work for somebody else, and I get my, and that happens. I have taught music before, and that was not through somebody else giving me a salary, but it had fee structure with it. So I knew that there was how much would come in. This was kind of different. This was me saying, hey, it's not just going to be me at this point, because now there's a school asking me, and I kept saying, hey, well, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. I have a master's degree. I should be having a job and sitting on a computer and going into the field and doing, and that's what I assumed I would be doing. um Eventually I let go, and I said, you know what, that's not what's going to happen, not right now. Maybe that's something later, and it's okay to do something different. And yeah, and then I had several people, like I was just doing this on my own. Then I said, my God, this is going to, I realized I had this foresight that, oh my gosh, this is going to blow out of proportion, because they're asking me for 5 kids during the summer, but then they're saying, hey, how about you work with 10 kids? And I was like, oh, that's a lot of kids. And I have no background in special education. At that point, I knew nothing. Maybe when I was teaching I worked for a year as a substitute and summer school teacher, and maybe I've worked with a couple of school classes that were special needs, um, but not by and large. I knew nothing. And suddenly overnight, people were starting to talk about, hey, there's this lady who works with special needs children doing yoga, and she's doing it regularly. One of the things that a lot of people noted, a lot of the schools noted, is that whereas they have had in India especially a yoga teacher for the, come in and teach a class, it was never a regular longitudinal program. It was, I come in one day and do a happy go lucky class for your kids, and I'm happy, they're happy, let's let it go. I started this idea there that it should be something that they have week after week after week, because I've seen that in my own life, yoga or anything for that matter, you do it one day, well, it's nice for that day, but you really have to have the regularity and the system in order for it to make a long-term impact. So that's what I was looking at doing. And I had a lot of people, a couple of the school teachers, or school directors, some friends, who all said, hey, this is a really great idea. You should be doing this and getting other people to do it also. And I put a call out for other people to join. And then one of the first things that we all sat down and we said, well, this should be a registered organization. Now, how easy is it for you to register an organization in India? It's actually not as difficult as one might think bureaucratically. but to understand what the process is, because nobody has a checklist that says, okay, bring your ID proof, bring an address, bring the name of your organization, bring us a check, and bring us a bank account information. Here's your 10 things that you, and bring us your a trust deed, and here's what needs to go on your trust deed. Nobody ever tells you that. In fact, at some point in my life, I think that is something I'd like to do for the Indian government, is to go to some of these departments and say, let's make a checklist. Then everybody knows what you're asking for. Because it's kind of they're not, if you, whatever you put down, they're going to accept, because nobody has regulated, do only this, do what you want. In that sense, there's a lot of freedom in India, because whatever you want, you can do, because nobody has already decided this is what you have to do.
And then
And yeah,
which city or state was this in?
I was in Bangalore at the time. Bangalore
Okay.
is the Silicon Valley of India and maybe South Asia, you could say.
Yes, I've been to Cupertino. I had friends who grew up there. So you went from Cupertino, US to the equivalent of Cupertino, India.
Yes, although at the time it wasn't as highly developed. Even getting internet was, this was, nearly 14 years ago.
Okay.
And there wasn't 13, 14 years ago, and there, even internet was not, having a Wi-Fi router was not a commonplace. And now it's, the last 10 years, it's been, everybody has that.
So thinking about yoga and well-being with youth, I mean, one question, well, and just a very practical question in terms of the organization, and we're not doing a evaluation, but like if you think about if a donor comes to you or someone else, how do you think about the impact? And then how have you been able, and the team or the board or your partners been able to sustain it? Because it's hard. I mean,
It's very hard.
whether you're building a cafe. My father, at one point, he's retired, he's 87, but at one point he bought a donut shop, and we lost all our money. Like business or nonprofits, like there's a lot of glamour, but there's a lot of sweat and equity work and burnout. So how have you been able to sustain it? And if someone asks you, or you do an annual report, or what do you talk about in terms of the both numbers of people who participate, but what is the change or the benefit that you can see resulting?
Okay, so there's first, I'd like to make a note that I'd like to note that after COVID hit, because our work has always been going to communities, whether it's the special needs community or a prison community or a rural community, whatever it may be. We did also work with my most important, the community that touches my heart the most, or at least used to, is trauma survivors, domestic violence survivors, and women's communities. Because as I said from the beginning, I've always been interested in women and women's issues, women's empowerment. But after COVID hit, our interactions with the communities have pretty much stopped. We did get a couple of small grants to support a couple of groups of, within 2021, maybe early 2021. So we had the opportunity to support a couple of groups at that time. But in general, our financial support has been less, as you said. I put in a lot of effort, especially for Prafull Oorja. I got to gain some funds. I did get these small breaks in the form of grants, some corporate social responsibility from some smaller corporate groups, like small to mid-size groups. Somehow I was able to manage. And until now, I've let that slide and thinking, okay, it's going to happen. We do also have a fee structure that's associated. It was always a sliding scale. Now what we've realized, so I've taken during COVID, and then we had some online trainings as well during COVID. Now, the last 2 years, we've kind of been reflecting and re-evaluating our system. One thing that's become apparent is that we cannot work with all of these communities in, whoever gets trained with us, we cannot find a community for them in their neighborhood, and we can't manage that daily activities. What we are best at doing is the training. And so we have actually spent the last 1.5 years editing and redeveloping our curriculum and realigning it to an online system so that, and we'll be launching it in the next 6 to 8 months. Yeah, it should come out on our website and our social media soon. I've let the finances slide somehow. And now what I've realized is that in order for the financials, in order for to get a sponsorship or a support, I really have to exude strength and confidence. I have to be relaxed and jovial. A lot of times, the funders want you to be this person who, they can relate to and things like that. Maybe I'm a little bit harder to relate to because I don't do these social activities as much, like, let's go for a beer and discuss this. Well, that doesn't align with my vision or my mission or my values. So to really find the people, I think one thing is I have to start looking for the people who want to invest, who don't have these requirements. I do have a group that I'm currently targeting for that. But the other thing is now I've realized that the value of our training has to include the value that I place on our trainers and how much we can afford to pay them or how much we should be paying them. And I want it to be fair and equitable. That has changed over time. When we first started, it may have been for a short 1 day course or a 6 hour session. Now we're looking at a 100-hour course that's over a period of 9 months, and it's going to be online. So that's very different. And then times have changed. People place different value on yoga and yoga certifications now. So to get this out, that's going to be that's very different. And yeah, so there'll be a very different value placed on a 100-hour training.
And can you talk in terms of the over the past almost 15 years, either some numbers or how do you know, either just from the stories people tell you or any data that a community, whether it's women who might have been subjected to violence or youth, or any community, like what is the type of change that you see or can document, or obviously nothing private, but or like you can say
Yeah.
there's individual change, but when you go to a donor, just think of yours as a team, like person X or community X was here, and this is measurable change or at least narrative change or behavioral change that you can see.
I think that's a very good question. And it is very hard to measure impact except through testimonials and narratives and anecdotal evidence in this field. Because how can we say that yoga has helped a child with cerebral palsy? Are we able to measure the impact on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, or even annual basis? We don't necessarily know how long it's going to take that person to get to from point A to point B. It's actually I'm taking physical therapy right now for some of my own health issues, and just yesterday or day before, my physical therapist, the first time I saw him, and he said, well, and I asked him, well, how long will it take? Knowing fully well that it's on a case by case basis. And to be able to document that case by case basis, so we have documented some cases, and right now, of course, there's a lot of growing research on something like yoga and autism, or yoga and Down syndrome, even yoga and domestic violence. My own master's thesis from UPeace and Austria was on yoga and domestic violence. But it is difficult to document case by case by case, because if you do a short-term study of 3 months, you may not see any changes. but you don't know that, oh, that has impacted 5 out of 10 of the people that you've worked with, and they're going to continue those practices, and it's going to give them a lifelong support. You don't know that. You don't know that, and you may never be able to know that. That being said, we are currently doing interviews and surveys with our past participants and even our past teacher trainers, people who've come through our training program, and we're trying to understand what their impact has been, what their observations have been, and we are in the process of publishing some of that work, also to be coming in the next 6 to 8 months.
Okay. So going back, we'll talk about PhD and all sorts of other things, but two questions. One is just very practical. So are there, for people who want to work in change making, again, regardless of their early stage or mid-career, what are some skills that you have particularly found valuable? And obviously each person has their own skills, capacity, path, but things that you have found exceptionally valuable, and have you developed those through formal education? They're innate, you've done upskilling, or someone just said, do this, and you figured out how to do it, and kind of your advice for others around, because you've talked about fundraising and communication and training and teaching. And so just people who want to be engaged with communities, any general advice and how to potentially build those skills?
Okay, this is a really good question. I think the first thing is to have, and for me, it has been to have knowledge of the subject area. And I will say that as a child, I've been involved in yoga, maybe from a previous lifetime, and definitely from the start of my life now, because my grandmother, although she was not doing yoga as an asana, as a posture practice, moving her hand, she never did that. Never. But she practiced the philosophies of yoga and was truly an epitome of love and empathy. And I think that has been one of my greatest uh, teachers, is just to observe my family, and just understand, okay, how are they using yoga? I've seen this in my father also, just almost complete detachment, and but still attached. Does work, but somewhat detached. Does what he needs to do. Um, of course, nobody's 100%. I'm not going to say anybody's. And I've seen the same thing with my mother, giving of self. And I've seen this throughout my life growing up. And then I was also involved in several. My mother was involved with several gurus and ashrams, so I've been active in that as well, and learned about what is yoga through those interactions. So that's the one thing. Now I think more relevant, and so it's subject matter, and that's happened. Of course, I did a teacher training program when I was going through trauma myself, and that was just phenomenal for me. I did it in the US. And what I like about the programs in the US, and programs as they're growing, again, is the systematic approach. I think that's really important in helping people to understand. That being said, like I said, I've had a little bit of influence from here, a little bit of influence from there, and it's kind of all come together in my life. Now, the other area that I would say that is extremely important when you are working with people or even with animals and plants is something called active listening. And I learned this from you, and also from Amr Abdullah and Muhammad Abu Nimar, I think, are three of my uh, most important mentors in that field. Of course, my own professor, Lester Kurtz, out of George Mason as well. I don't want to miss him because he's been a rock solid person for me in my life. Um, what I actually learned the importance of active listening in building empathy and love when I first arrived in Banaras to do my PhD, and we had somebody from the US come and do a program, and one of their friends who is of Indian origin but is living in part in the US and part he's a professor at Brown, or he teaches at Brown, and I was his active listening partner. And when he finished um, his talk, and I was told to repeat what he said, "Oh, you seem to understand me better than I understand me." And I realized in that moment, this is what active listening is. It's to truly be there for the other person. Yeah, check out these other people. Lester R. Kurtz. Oh, didn't know he has an R.
It's funny because my wife Catalina has a PhD in conflict resolution as well, also from George Mason, and I understand active listening. It's very hard to do. And I think part of it is if you practice whether it's yoga or mindfulness or meditation or something that makes people more aware of others and environments, I think it's much easier. But if it's just active
and she's
listening,
a yoga teacher.
Actually, now she's really into CrossFit, but she was very into yoga for 10 years and then has moved more to, and my mom's done yoga for 40 years. She used to drag us to an ashram and, make us, eat in silence and stuff like that.
Yeah, because the yoga, like, your wife may not be doing yoga like this, but she's learned the philosophies of yoga and she's practicing that. And that silence is, yes, yeah, we have to eat in silence in ashrams. It's not easy.
I want to welcome Anna Milena from Colombia. Yes, she's asking, will this be? Yes, this will be, the video recording will be available as soon as this ends, and then the podcast episode will be up the following Friday. So not this Friday, but a week. So a question on working. I'm doing therapy now. I grew up in a family of mental health professionals, so, I've done therapy on and off. I'm doing really interesting approach right now, EMDR, which I've done different kinds, but EMDR is really interesting. But a question, and I've done work with populations who've suffered really difficult things, and a lot of peace building approach and peace builders. I've studied a lot about psychology, but I'm not a trained psychologist, and so I think a lot of the assumptions of some practitioners of peace building is if people have been exposed to natural or human-made conflict or violence. Everybody has different levels of resilience in communities, but there could be some potential challenges that are left. And part of peace building is creating safe spaces for people to engage and talk. And I've actually seen sometimes like that's dangerous, particularly when outsiders come in, and the idea is like, oh, you might have experienced something that could potentially be traumatic. Let's talk about it. Sometimes that's not the best approach. And so I just want to ask, since you have done a fair amount of work with people in circumstances where they've been exposed to challenges, whether it's domestic violence or verbal or other types of abuse, what are your thoughts for anybody in the world, regardless of the profession, when they might engage in a helping role with communities or people who have been exposed to something challenging? It's almost like the checklist, like, please don't do this, and please, like, think about this.
I think you really have to be patient, because you cannot just say, okay, now let's sit in a circle and let's do this. Now, that may work in some situations. Let's all sit in a circle and let's discuss what happened. But you have to think what is culturally relevant, what is personally relevant, what is situationally relevant, because somebody may not be ready to speak about what's happened to them. But when they are, to just be there and be ready to listen, and not necessarily to say, okay, now here's the solution, because everybody has to find their own solution and their own path. What your path is based on your situation, the baggage that you're bringing, and where you're at in this moment. The solution for somebody else, for me, is, okay, I'm from a different place, and maybe our paths cross, but I have to find my own solution in the end. And so just be aware, like, we don't have the solutions. In fact, the solution has to come from within the person or the community.
Okay. Welcome, Anna from Colombia, and Samprikta from India. Please keep letting us know your questions or comments. Anything else you'd want to share? Just because there's also the question of, I mean, Catalina, my partner, has done a lot of work on policy, and violence. And so, any thoughts about how does someone find their role of, whatever the challenge or the opportunity they'd like to engage with, whether to be working directly with communities or on trying to change policy or funding, like any thoughts? I mean, obviously all sectors and approaches are needed, but how did you find your particular role? And then I want to link that to both your master's thesis and PhD. Like, what in the world made you decide to do a PhD in this particular, thinking about the work you've been doing, and how did that lead to a decision to do a PhD?
I think what led me to start the PhD, I always felt that, especially when I was running Prafull Oorja full time, I was thinking, okay, well, I want to do the research to understand how is this impactful? What is happening to these children, or how are the women, being impacted? So I always, or whichever group it was, I always wanted to do that research. But because I was entrenched in the day-to-day work, and sometimes being not just the administrative work, but also sometimes being the substitute teacher, or being the regular teacher, the long-term teacher for a particular organization, I wasn't able to also devote the time to the research. And then when COVID hit, I said, well, maybe it's time I relooked at this, and I'll start applying for some PhD programs, with the intent that my research would be on yoga and autism, or yoga and special needs, or one of these areas. Bearing in mind again that, I had come to India without any real intention. Thought when I got there, I thought, okay, well, I've been working on yoga and domestic violence. I'll find a domestic violence organization and approach them. Nobody ever agreed to it. Nobody even responded. And then suddenly the special needs children came to me. So I thought, well, maybe this is my path, and I'll be in that space. When I got to my institute, Banaras Hindu University and the Malviya Center for Peace Research, my supervisor, my advisor or guide, my guide, kind of pushed me to think beyond. And I think I'm very appreciative that, yeah, his name is Manoj Mishra, and he actually went to UPeace also. Um, and he knows Amar very well. He knows a couple of other Mahmoud and everybody from the environment programs. But what I'm really appreciative that he said, wait a minute, this has kind of been done, and it was boring, yoga and autism. I thought, oh boy, he doesn't want me to study yoga. This is terrible. This is what I know. and he pushed me to think beyond that and come up with a topic. And it did take me quite some time to really hone in on, finalize that topic. But immediately I said, well, if I'm not going to study yoga and autism, I'm going to study yoginis, because I want to be women's empowerment. I want to be involved in women's empowerment. And I had already spent the previous year or the previous 6 months traveling to some very remote locations in India to look at yogini temples. And I'm part of a yoga council, in a women's yoga council in India. So
And
I
just
thought,
just
well, this is
interrupt for 1 second. So just to make sure, so yogini is the female, and for people who may not know, is the female equivalent of a yogi. Or when you say yogini, what is the population you're referring to? Like
yeah.
like senior experienced female practitioners of yoga?
Of yoga in its many forms.
Yes. Okay.
Not necessarily yoga as, stand up and do a tree pose. Not necessarily that. Also, those who are who are imbibed with certain powers and certain knowledge and wisdom through their practices. It could be a meditative practice that gives them certain, awareness and power. So yes, and that is both the past and the present. It's not just the contemporary women who are, teaching yoga or something like this. Um, yeah, yeah. So I thought to myself that maybe I'd like to do something with these yoginis. And what I honed in on over time is that wherever I went, there are women communities and spiritual women's communities, including my own the council that I'm part of. But there's also other, and even my NGO, it's primarily women. We have had men in the past, and our trustees have been men, but primarily women were coming and saying, "Hey, I'd like to do this work also." Um, yeah, it's not that we were completely devoid of men, and I would never, I did at the time, I would never have said no to men. But yes, we were, that my NGO Prafull Oorja was also primarily women, and I kept going back to, hey, I was always interested in elderly Indian women, women in domestic violence, and yoga, and now that that string has, led me to now looking at women's communities, spiritual women's communities, or yogini sanghas, which is basically the Sanskritized version of spiritual women's communities, um, and how they impact peace building and diplomacy, which people think that what do the two have no relevance. And actually, when I'm in Banaras, the yoginis are very relevant as the first emissaries or diplomats of the Lord Shiva to the city of Banaras or Kashi when he tried to uproot the sitting king. Then that was their role. He said, he looked around and he said the first people that he decided to send. Now they failed, but so did almost everybody else. Let's not, but they tried their best, and their tactics were very useful to understanding what yoginis or what spiritual women can, the strategies and the practice, the planning and the methodologies that they've used. So that's, yeah, that's where my PhD is. But maybe I skipped over
No,
a question.
no, it's really interesting. And then how are you? I mean, two questions related to that. How are you contextualizing it? So is it interviews? Are you doing historical research? Are you observing? And then can you provide any contemporary examples of, and are you looking mostly internally in terms of how the communities themselves are practicing when a conflict comes up, or you're looking at more their role in the wider community?
Well, that's really interesting. No, I was only looking at how they are impacting the wider, the local community, as well as um, global diplomacy, and or macro level diplomacy. That was only, but now this is a very interesting thing: is how do they apply their own ideas internally? So to that extent, I am looking at one group that is a contemporary group that is from a Gandhian lineage, and that itself should, everybody should recognize that if it's a Gandhian lineage, they are looking at nonviolence, ahimsa, truth, satya, and a few other, yeah, they're looking at peace, um, and also very unique forms of diplomacy. Um, Another group, the other groups that I'm looking at are past. They are from the 7th century, the seventh through ninth century, ninth through 12th century, and then one is possibly 2,500 years back. So some of it I'll have to look at historical, or I'll have to look at the literature, itihasa, and the and texts, um, original texts, and scripts and things like that. But for example, with this current, and some of it, has already been researched quite well. Um, but not on the level of how they impact diplomacy and peace. And the reason why I'm so interested, and so I'm going to take whatever these three groups. I have some amount of their going to their temples and doing field visits and seeing how people interact and build peace. Some of it will be through academic research, the usual literature research. Some of it will be through and then of course the one that is the contemporary group, I will go to their contemporary site and interview several of the residents.
Um, uh, really, really interesting. I could ask a million questions, but I won't. But I guess for people who are interested in your research, are you sharing along the way, whether it's in video or blogs or any other way, or it's kind of as you get through the research, they'll be like, if someone's like, this is amazing, and they want to understand how it's being applied, are you sharing now, or it's more once you get to a certain part of the data collection or analysis, then they'll be sharing?
I think I'm going to start sharing that in January. Again, everything is in that 3 to 6 month or 8 month time frame. It will be happening. Right now I've just been reading and trying to just even think about this topic myself. Again, the reason why is I've realized how impactful women in a community can be. And I think that women in a community building peace is even something great. And it has happened from time immemorial, though we just have to be the ones to recognize that, hey, this group from 2500 years ago, or from 900 years ago, has been building peace in this way and has continued to build peace in devotees that are impacted even today. And we just have to recognize that and highlight that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many faith-based or leaders motivated or guided by faith around the world, of course, who escalate conflict. There's tons of examples where it's my religion or my community over yours, but there's also dozens and thousands of examples of at the micro and macro level of religious leaders saying, yes, faith might guide them, but it's about engaging, understanding, action. And obviously there, Thich Nhat Hanh or Martin Luther King, or, I mean, so many communities, in Colombia, there's a lot, competing faiths, but each faith has its challenges, but the Catholic Church in particular and others have played a really important role in peace. I'm not saying all parts of the Catholic, so every community and institution, and I'm on the advisory board of Collaborative Development Associates, and one of the things they say is always like, look for the connectors, so you can find the connectors or the dividers in any community. For someone who maybe is really intrigued by what you're saying and just wants to think about whether it's related to India or somewhere else in the world, do you have any favorite resources or places to go and start kind of engaging? I mean, there's the International Center for Religion Diplomacy and the World Council on Religions and Peace, but anywhere where you kind of feel like it's not just India specific, but just to understand how in so many parts of the world, people who are in part guided by their faith are actually working for peace.
Wow. So I have been associated with the United Religions Initiative in the past. I'm still somewhat in touch with some people there, but I think that's a really great organization that just gives a platform to to groups around the world to collect, to kind of be seen at a global level. And I think that's a great opportunity if somebody wants to join that or even just know about what they're doing. It's an interesting organization.
Okay. And then two other questions for people who are thinking about PhDs, because you're kind of in the middle. And are you teaching as well, in addition to other, like, are you teaching other students?
I am mentoring some students and working with some other students, but because of at this point, I'm not teaching full time. I do teach from time to time.
Okay. So any thoughts about, I mean, I wrote a blog post on whether to PhD or not PhD, but just like, I remember when I was an undergrad, there was a PhD student and we were sitting in the office and she's like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And in my mind, as a young, whatever, 21-year-old, I'm like, oh, that's ridiculous. It's not that hard. And then once I did it, for me, I have friends who did it in a few years. For me, it took a very long time. So just any thoughts? You talked about that you were doing a lot of work with your NGO and had a lot of questions that you wanted to devote more time to. And that seems like that kept coming up. And so anyone who is thinking about a PhD, obviously people need to decide for themselves, but what are some ways you would encourage people to maybe think about if it's a potentially right decision for them? And also you chose to do it in India, like any advice, is it better to do it in a region where the communities you want to work with, because a lot of people will do it in Europe or Australia or Singapore and then go to communities to study them. So just any thoughts on that?
Yeah, they go to the US and Canada also.
Yeah.
But I think it depends on where you're based. And I think it depends on what you would like to study. Now, whether to go to do to do a PhD or not, the world is changing, and a lot more knowledge is available at your fingertips, and there's a lot more connectivity that you can learn from people in different ways, learn from places in different ways, learn about people and places in other ways. And I think that if you decide to go to grad school, go when you really know why you're going. Now, that being said, in different parts of the world, a PhD means different things. And, for example, in my university and even in my department, some people will do the PhD and in the meanwhile, they'll be employed full time as in teaching because that's their purpose, is to get that job. Now, some people will do the PhD because they want is to get the academic role. Some people will do the PhD because they want that knowledge and they want to become a knowledge, resource person, and they want to do the research. So I think you have to know why you're going to grad school, or why you're taking any course, or why you're seeking out knowledge in any particular way. And like when I was doing during COVID, I was doing academic counseling for students who wanted from India, who wanted to study abroad, doing their master's degrees in different places, mostly in engineering and business, but also in the social sciences and a few other, and English and things like that. Um, my my advice to them was always, first, work a little while and know why you're doing, and figure out which area you want to focus on. Don't just say, I'll just be an engineer and I'm just going to work for Tesla or Apple or Microsoft and Amazon. And now Amazon is a big one. Know why you want to work for those groups if you want to, and know what you're going to do for them. Or if you say, hey, I want to work for startups because I want to really do something interesting in AI or in certain other, or in electric vehicles or whatever it may be, but know why. And for that, you really need to know yourself, know your values, know your vision.
Thank you so much. And I would just add one, it's wonderful advice. The other thing I would say is understand because most of us live in at least semi-capitalist societies, understand the job market. Because a lot of people, obviously, and sometimes there's a book I still haven't read called The Good Enough Job. It's on I think I bought it. Sometimes it's just like make enough to like pay the bills, and maybe your passion doesn't have to be your work, or maybe, but I find a lot of people study and they don't understand where the market is or going, and doesn't mean you can't make it in what you study, but just, when people say they want to study mediation, I think it's an amazing skill. But the supply side of organization, the supply side is much bigger than the demand side of people who want to work in mediation versus the organizations that are willing to pay for it. But of course, you can use mediation in lots of other areas. But I see a lot of that. Like, I'm going to study, and that's going to lead to a job in X, and just being aware that it's often not a linear path. So three more questions, and then we'll start wrapping up. The first is for your NGO, what type of support are you looking for? And if someone listens to this now or in the future and they're like, this is amazing. I mean, obviously, resources is one thing. Are you looking for technical support, or do you take volunteers? And since the training is moving online, is it designed for whom, in which context? Like, who are the people that you're
Yeah.
hoping will take it?
Okay, so Prafull Oorja is going to relaunch our training program, which is yoga for communities in vulnerable conditions, or yoga for empowerment. We're still tussling between these two, and the purpose is to train yoga teachers from around the world in how to work with these different communities, to give them the tools and the techniques that are used, and then allow them to go elsewhere. So if anybody wants to join the training, please reach out to me and we'll get you connected to Prafull Oorja and the team that's working on the training right now. The second thing is how we need support. I would say that, we are going to have a fee structure involved, of course, for the training. But I would also say that if anybody is interested in supporting as a volunteer and helping to do outreach and make sure that we have enough participants, because again, we don't want to do an online training if it's not going to reach everybody. This first online training, I think we're going to do as a live online training. But going forward, of course, we are hoping that we can do a classroom based, so an online classroom, and you can go on your own time, watch the videos. But we also think that it's really important to have the interactivity, because that's really where you learn, is when you're with other people. So I think if anybody has technical skills, sure, we'd love to have support in that way. And if anybody wants to support us as an NGO, we do accept donations, and more importantly, we're looking for a larger corporate or grant to support this, so that we can then offer it to people who may not have the funds. Because yoga teachers often don't have funds to do to do everything.
Then a second question, is there any particular book, movie, or podcast or show that's just occupying your brain in a positive way? It doesn't need to have anything to do with research or work.
Can I give you a few of them?
Sure.
Okay, although I am planning to launch my podcast soon on A World of Women, I am still learning about the world of podcasting. And I think one podcast that I really like is Masala Podcast, which is about Indian, especially I've listened to a lot about women, and from India, and I think it's being done by somebody who's based in the UK. They also have a short course on how to do podcasting. So that's a really good one. Another one that I listen to often is by Arundhati Bhatnagar, and she's from Bangalore, I think, or somewhere in Karnataka, and she's based in maybe Seattle or somewhere in Washington, and it's called Let's Talk Yoga. So these are topics that are relevant to me. In terms of books, I'm hoping to read, I just found out about a book called Feminist Utopias, and since my my podcast is about A World of Women, which is just about women and all the contributions that they've given to society, both past and present, and their lineages. And I think that will be a very interesting read. To the extent that I'm focused, my focus is on women in spiritual settings. There's several great books that I've read lately, which is one by Laura Amazone, who did her. Do you want the name of the book? but Laura Amazone.
Hmm.
It's not Amazon and not
Yeah.
Amazon, like
Mhm.
like the river or the company. It's two Z's and an E.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll put this all in
Um,
the show notes. But if you can say, if you know the name of the book.
it's called. Sa- I'll see if I can
Okay. Yeah.
find it.
This will go in the show notes.
Goddess Durga and Sacred Female Power.
Hmm.
Very interesting book. And in addition, there's a book by Rick Veda, Combating Inner Terrorism, which I just finished as well. And both are about the goddess Durga, um, and in her many forms and the work that she does. Uh, yeah, it's just both inner and outer. In addition, I think a couple of other really interesting reads are by Rita Manchanda, who has a book about women in politics and peace, and and shows how women and women cooperatives, women groups around, especially in South Asia, have impacted diplomacy and peace building. And yeah, though not a spiritual women's group, but a women's groups. I think those would be, some of the major ones. Um, yeah. And one of the things that I love to listen to, because I think it's maybe one of the most peaceful things uh, that is possible, is something called lullabies.
Like for bedtime or for kids.
Well, not for children per se, but I listen to it in the morning also.
Okay.
But children like them sometimes.
Yes.
I think babies sometimes get irritated by them.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, one of the things is every baby that comes into my life, I don't have my own children, but babies that come into my life, I like to compose a little lullaby just for them. Because I had a little lullaby composed
Mhm.
for me by my grandfather. Terrible singer, terrible voice, just very hoarse and
Mhm.
gruff. But that's still the sound that I want to listen to because it, whatever you remember as a baby and when you were in vitro, that's the most beautiful sound.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny because in Colombia they have something called canti cuentos. I won't go into all the detail. It's like not lullabies, it's kids' music, and I never loved it. So Catalin, our son, he's very musical, but like we would have different. I would put on stuff with a lot of rhythm because I love rhythm and sound. And
Yeah,
Kata likes that, but she'd be like, "Don't put that on." She wants. So we had like a music battle in our house over which music. Yeah. But our son, I mean, he's 13, isn't. But like we used to do tango parties, just like so. It's like music is so joyful. Um, and
yeah.
then when you talk about being a musician or composing, do you have any recordings or what type of music do you write or listen to or play?
So, as many things in the world have been leaning towards a patriarchal system, so has the traditional music that I grew up with, Carnatic music. And, although there were many women composers and writers before them, the the fathers of Carnatic music are considered to be three men from the 17th, 18th centuries, 18th, 19th in that region, um, and in from one particular area who were gifted funds by they had royal patronage. Um, I want to compose music in that genre, and I have a few pieces that are on my YouTube channel, and yeah, and I continue, but I don't necessarily do my poetry or my music like sitting. I mean, we can't necessarily spend our whole day doing that. It doesn't fetch a lot of funds. Although I do spend quite a bit of time on my own self. I take the mornings for myself. But I just let these flow and let them come. When they come, they come. And I, try to capture them, write them down, and put them together piece by piece.
Okay. So we'll add your YouTube channel to the show notes. So the final two questions, and we'll wrap up because I want to be respectful of your time. For the PhD program at your university, just for people who have never heard of it, do they mostly have students from India? Do they have? You mentioned, a U.S. student, and just if someone's looking for a really interesting program in South Asia, what type of students are they attracting? Or it's mostly Indian students or young professionals, or
Yeah, it's mostly Indian students. I'm there who, and most people are in their, they're in that 25 to 35 range. I'm a little bit different, and I'm not from India originally, though I've lived there for a while now. And then there is one person who just completed his PhD and he's about 60 years old, and he's originally Irish, but he's lived around the world. There's somebody in my batch who is from Rwanda and the USA. And I think we just have a new student from Bangladesh, but it is primarily people in their 25 to 35 age range and who are, young and interested in academia or working in this area. And they're mostly Indian.
and then the last question for people to stay informed on your work and research and writing and just interesting things, is LinkedIn best? Is it your NGO? Do you have like for people to? And one is to contact you. I assume LinkedIn is the best, but if they want to just say like when you share stuff, what's your preferred channel?
Yeah, so I will be on LinkedIn, and I also have a blog and a website blog. And but I think if somebody contacts me, gets in touch with me on LinkedIn, I'll be whatever is posted on the blog will also come onto LinkedIn. That's really the best option. And yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and maybe the Instagram, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, Colombia
Um,
Instagram is hot, so I find that. I mean, I use it, but there's so much advertising. Like, I'm not going to get into that.
yeah,
So
yeah. And then for my NGO, we have a website.
okay.
But again, everything is listed on my LinkedIn. I think really that's the best.
Okay. So thank you so much for generously sharing your time and energy and wisdom and questions, and everyone for listening. We had a lot of people from East Africa today. So thank you for joining. As we started off, just three quick requests. Please follow Sowmya on LinkedIn and follow or connect with her if you are interested in yoga and peace or well-being. Follow our NGO or help share or explore if you want to do the training. If you happen to have resources, then get in contact. And then please consider sharing, rating the podcast. You can find all 160 plus episodes in PCDN or any major podcasting platform. And this episode will be live in about 8 days. So thank you so much, Sowmya, and everyone for
Thank you
listening.
very much, Craig. And thank you, everybody, for participating and looking